Hello everyone, we're here at the Infosys APAC Confluence on the sidelines of the Australian Open Tennis 2020 here in Melbourne. I'm Deepak Padaki, I head strategy for Infosys, and I'm also the Chief Risk Officer of the company. And I'm absolutely delighted to have with me today Major Matina Jewell. She's earned her accolades in the Australian Army for 15 plus years. But interestingly, she's had stints in Syria, in Lebanon. She's been after the warlords in Solomon Islands. And she's, I think, boarded the smuggling ships in the Arabian Gulf. I mean, this is a very interesting story that you have. But really what we're talking to her about today is the leadership lessons that she learned along the way in all of her experiences. So thank you, Matina, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I want to start with something that leaders that we come across are facing today in this rapidly transforming world. How do you stay the course when you're faced with business situations that you never bargained for? And you've been in a few of those situations, so I'd love to hear from you on how you face those challenges.
Yeah, I think, in every business, every environment, we plan for what we're going to encounter. But in the military, we have a great saying that, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So you come up with a plan, you have your redundancy plans, A, B, C, and then once you've gotten those battles and those firefights, all of a sudden scenario Z appears and no one's actually planned for that. It's important that we do still plan and structure ourselves, but we need to have that flexibility in our organisations and that level of creative thinking that people are empowered to make those decisions when they encounter something that we haven't actually thought of and take action, particularly if timing is a critical issue.
And then in your own experience, to bring this adaptability to succeed, is there training that you do, or how does it work in the Army?
Yeah, certainly we train a lot for all those different scenarios, and you put under those pressures in those training situations where everything's gone wrong. And you've got the staff there saying, what are you going to do now, Troop Commander? Make a decision, because often in any of those environments and transferring that to the business world, often the worst case scenario is when we make no decision, when we become immobilised with fear and we become stagnant. It's then very hard for us to make that first decision and to get the momentum moving forward. So often it is like, if we can break the problem down instead of being overwhelmed by it, bring down some little things that we can get some small successes on and keep moving forward. Just make those decisions so that even if you make the wrong decision, you can make another decision and get back on track far quicker than if you become stopped and immobilised and then, overthinking the situation sometimes. So often we train to keep people nimble, agile, and that helps us adapt in those environments. And also we empower our people right down to the frontline responders, the soldiers, the private soldiers on the front line. We need them to be capable of making decisions, because in the Australian Defence Force, we don't often have an officer overlooking them or a senior soldier giving them the direction. So, it's that empowerment of people to be able to respond and react in those situations.
But you touched upon an interesting point. Today's world, there's so much of change that organizations need to change, and therefore you need to take risk. And you can't avoid taking the risk. You have to take the risk because otherwise you're left behind. But you need to take calculated risks. And earlier today you were talking in our session about how you were faced with situations where you could either go forward or you could go backward because there was a situation on the ground. How do you take those calculated risks? What's the framework that you use to take risks?
Yeah, and you're spot on in that we don't want organisations where we remove risk, because otherwise we won't survive. In the business world, change is happening so fast. We need to be changing and evolving, and that requires that risk. But as you say, it's got to be those calculated risks that we manage the best we possibly can to get the right outcome. But I think in those crisis situations where I was in Lebanon during the war, having to make those decisions, I went through my processes and looking at the options, and there's a whole detailed plan that I do with my decision-making processes that I use for either split-second decisions or even long, project decisions where I've got more time to analyse. But it's about making that decision, it's managing the risk associated and also managing the responsibility. I think it's one of the things that I've seen from the big shift from military to corporate world is that, we talk about risk and we talk about decision making, but we don't necessarily talk about that responsibility with the risk. And it's the responsibility that actually stops people from making decisions, where you see these organisations that become hamstrung because people are afraid of making the wrong call. And that goes back to the culture of the organisation. As leaders, we actually need to empower people, make them feel reassured that we want them to make the right decision, even if they get it wrong. We've got to accept that they won't get it right all the time, but at least that they're making those decisions. As a business, we can continue evolving and being nimble and robust.
How do you balance in pressure situations, the emotions can get the better of you. So how do you balance the emotional part of it with the rational thinking of, looking at objectives and alternatives and evaluating your options?
Absolutely, and I think for me as an officer in command of soldiers on the battlefield, my biggest fear was not that I would be injured myself or killed. It was that I would make a decision that would lead to the injury or deaths of my soldiers. So it was that responsibility piece that actually makes it very difficult. And I found in my career, in many ways, you have to disassociate from the emotions so that you can remain in that logical, rational mindset. Because when you're in a situation where your life is threatened, your team's lives are threatened, you need to kind of separate the emotion so that you can keep making decisions to stay alive. So for me, it's almost that disassociation. And I think sometimes as a leader, it was actually easier for me to do that because I wasn't just worried about my own life. My responsibility was for an entire team.
That's right.
And so there wasn't that personal emotion attached with it, it was more the emotion for the whole team. And I think sometimes that burden of leadership can be an advantage in those situations to help you disassociate.
But then talking of teams themselves, in your experience, what are the lessons to empower those teams and how do you carry them along with the purpose? Because in many of these missions, it's as successful as the whole team being successful, right? It's not just one person, there's lots of things coming together. So how have you carried your teams along?
Yeah, I think in the military environment, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the team. And when the lives are on the line, everyone needs to come. So it's a pretty good incentive for people to be focused, do their absolute best every single moment. Because if they don't, then we may not survive. So that's a good incentive in that aspect. But also, I think for me as a leader, my job was to draw on the strengths of each individual that I had in the team, and actually draw on that diversity that already sits within most organisations to make the entire team as cohesive and strong as it could possibly be. And I saw that was one of my key roles as a leader, is just empowering people to bring their best every day. And that means knowing your team, knowing your people to a very deep level where you understand their strengths, their weaknesses, assigning right people, right job, right time, and kind of almost orchestrating bringing that team to the forefront.
What's your message to leaders on how they can influence change? I mean, even out of adversity, which is perhaps your situation as well. You had to get out for medical reasons, but you're using that to your advantage today to push your message across. So what's your message to leaders on how they can influence change?
Yeah, I guess my motto these days is that change is an opportunity. And I think change is happening to us so fast in the business world that, in many ways we're all a bit change weary. But change is actually inevitable. And if we're not changing rapidly and responsively, then, our businesses will become irrelevant quite quickly. So I think change it's one of those funny things that we all naturally fear and resist change, but it's vital for our survival in business and in life. So as a leader, I think it's really important that we kind of have that skill set to invigorate our team and our team members, to have that mindset shift when it comes to tackling change, where we embrace change as something positive in our workplaces and in our personal lives, rather than resisting something that's inevitable. So I think that's a key lead for leaders, is try and shift that mindset that change is an opportunity.
Well, thank you, Matina. It was lovely talking to you. Thank you for being at our event and for sharing your perspectives.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.